enlightened. Can everyone hear me? Hi, good morning, all. Yesterday you were enlightened and procurement was demystified for you in relation to the NHS. Today I intend to give you an insight into the games industry and procurement. And by the games industry, I mean major sporting events, not perhaps the computer game industry, which we may all be familiar with. Okay, so the poll for you in the room today, and that will be just by a show of hands, is whether public sector procurement processes can work in a games context. So could you just give me, raise your hand if you agree that public sector procurement processes can work in a games context?
Am I agreeing?
Yeah, are you agreeing? Okay, and if you disagree? If you're not sure, if you're on the fence, okay, that's fine, fair. And then for everybody online, if you just want to put some comments into the comment box, and Blaise will very helpfully tally them up, and then we'll revisit that later on. So it appears that in the actual room here today, most people agree that it can work. I've got one person that quite specifically disagrees, which is fine, and welcome to have questions and debate on that later, and a few people that aren't too sure. So note that I stated that public procurement processes can work in a game context, not whether it's legally required to. In reality, they are legally required to work in many countries across the EU and in the UK. Because if a sporting event is being funded by public money, and particularly if it's in the EU and the UK, then the Public Contracts Directives 2014 or the Public Contracts Regulations 2015 will apply, so we do have to follow public procurement law. In 2021, there was a ruling by the Court of Justice was funded by public funding, and because it was created by legislation and fulfilling the purpose of that legislation, public sector procurement laws apply to the Italian Football Association. The court re-examined the directive section, Articles 214 of the PCD, which details that a public governed body by public law, three conditions which are there up on the slide. So it must have legal personality, it must be financed for the most part by a contracting authority or under the management of a contracting authority, or have a board that wholly, more than half of whose members are appointed by the contracting authority. And it must also be established for a specific purpose of meeting the needs and the general interest of the public benefit, but also natural or commercial character. So some state-owned companies that have their own profit-making ability are sometimes not covered by public. An organisation that meets those three criteria, then they most likely will be governed by public procurement law. So this happened despite the fact that the Football Association itself had a self-financing capacity in relation to its non-public activities that it carried out. It goes to show that the issue of determining whether an organisation is a body governed by public law is not an easy determination, and is often quite nuanced, so you have to look at each organisation on its own. That applies to the Games Organising Committee as well as it did to sports governing bodies within the EU. The Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games is funded primarily by sponsorship initially, but then the remainder will be 75% funding by national government and 25% by local government. So we're accordingly subject to public procurement law. So our entity is both an organising committee and a delivery authority, and some of you may be familiar with London 2012 and the structure that took place there. That consisted of an Olympic delivery authority, which procured most of the construction infrastructure and major sporting venues, but also a London organising Committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, which was responsible for the procurement of the supplies and services of games, but not the major infrastructure. So Birmingham 2022 has not procured the actual capital build projects, for example, Sandwell Aquatic Centre and the capital build which is taking place at Alexia Stadium, which is where the main athletics will be taking place and the opening and closing ceremonies. But we have procured other things that have made the games ready to go and ready to be delivered. For example, what we call overlay, which is basically adding in like temporary seating and making a venue fit for games. And all the other services, things, for example, the ceremonies providers and suppliers, sports presentation, everything else like that, that's all provided by the organising committee. So LOCOG, which is the London Organising Committee for 2012, was a private company limited by guarantee, and because of its makeup, it didn't consider itself subject to procurement law. However, it did have a delivery partner, the Olympic Delivery Authority, which was subject to procurement law and did all of the major infrastructure procurements. Birmingham is different to London 2012 in the sense that we are obviously subject to the public procurement law, but we don't have a delivery partner as the London 2012 did to manage all the delivery of the games and conversion of the legacy of the games. So we're just doing it all ourselves. There are less than 100 days to go, and every week that goes on, we get closer to the games, more to deliver, more contracts to conclude, so that we are fit for games delivery. So we have procured over 200 procurements since 2018, which have been over the value of 10K, but the value of procurements that we've concluded, including the total range, of each more. 60 plus of these procurements have been above threshold, which is currently £213,477. And I'd say for us, the public sector procurement processes are working. We're here today and we've managed to procure so much, and we're near conclusion with the majority of our contracts. It's been able to enhance the fairness, such as open advertisements and objective evaluation criteria, which we're obliged to comply with in PCR. And value for money has also been driven through the compliance of PCR. For example, budgets have to be determined in advance and publicised when we issue our adverts. And we're also looking at the competitive processes to enable us to assess. Efficiency has also been gained in the process because we've conducted so many procurements within such a short time frame that we've been able to standardise our documents and assess market capability across the whole event. So the public procurement process does drive strategic thinking, because obviously you need to create your pipeline, think about what you're doing when and how everything fits in, and that all feeds into all the risk management within the organisation. Particularly since 2014 in the EU and England has made it so that everything has to be front-loaded in the public procurement process. So all the documents need to be ready at the outset, so the organisation is obviously forced to think about all of this strategy at the outset of each procurement. Often non-procurement work streams have followed the procurement process pipeline method of planning. The procurement process also facilitates knowledge sharing between the clients in the joint procurements that we undertake. So we work with a lot of games partners, in particular in the West Midlands. We work with the police, we work with Transport for West Midlands as well. We also take part in frameworks. We procure frameworks, which has in turn minimised our risks and associated with supplier capacity, but also sped up the procurement process. Social value and sustainability is key to Birmingham 2022 because we're charged with providing a legacy within the areas which the games will be taking place. Procurement legislation and policy has helped assist with this. In particular, the procurement policy notes 620 and 1120 have facilitated legacies becoming a reality. So procurement policy note 620 is about taking account of social value in the award of central government contracts. It stipulates a minimum weighting of 10% for the evaluation of social value. In the OC, we range our weighting for social value between 10 to 20% and sometimes go up to 20% on evaluating social outcome as part of the general tender evaluation. dependent on what the actual procurement is. And Procurement Policy Note 1120 is about reserving below threshold procurements for certain organisations, for example, small and medium enterprises and voluntary community and social enterprises. And we've found that the procurement process is working for us as a channel for delivering our strategic focuses, which have included sustainability. We have a sustainability charter upon which all our suppliers need to sign up to. They also need to tender in relation to social value in general, and our social value charter, we're one of the first games to have a social value charter, but our social value charter, things such as sustainability, health and well-being and human rights. We have an anti-slavery policy and modern slavery clauses within our contracts which our suppliers need to sign up to. And we're really keen, because of the nature of our organisation, to have everybody getting involved and becoming more healthy and fitter as part of our community engagement. So if our suppliers can help us deliver that, we're always keen to hear. And also if they're delivering it within their workforce, which is what often a lot of suppliers focus on, then we're keen to engage with suppliers that are showing a good example within their workforce and then reaching that out to the wider community. Digital. So we're really happy that we've been able to procure completely through our EProcurement systems. It's a key advantage of a public sector procurement process, possible for anyone to participate anywhere in the world, and obviously widens the catchment for tenderers that we're facilitating and assessing and can ultimately engage with. When I compare it to my experience of working in the private sector and tendering for private sector procurement, I think it's so much easier just to use the public sector version, because with our system you can just look directly on our portal and you can see what documents are available and whether you've got everything you need to tender. So it's very transparent. Previously, games did not use a wholly electronic procurement system. However, it's mandatory now in the UK, so contracting authorities need to do this. Another benefit of e-procurement is that the OC's procurement system has not been affected by lockdowns and our Birmingham's Tier 3 COVID restrictions, which meant that people had to work from home if they could. So when I joined the OC within a month of lockdown, and many of my procurement colleagues joined from that time up until last year, we were able just to carry on with our procurements. The process itself continued to work, which enabled us to focus on the other effects of the pandemic, and such as market availability, but also to focus on the contractual protection that we could put in our contracts in relation to the pandemic, because obviously prior to the pandemic, a pandemic was coined as a force majeure event, but obviously, as we know, we are all here today living with a pandemic, so it's become a bit more of a norm, and it's no longer a force majeure event. We're fortunate in the sense that we are a new organisation, and that at that stage we hadn't started the majority of our procurements. So we were actually able to put in specific provisions about the pandemic to make it flexible, to allow us to obviously partner with our sub-suppliers and continue to deliver the games, but be mindful that everybody's been affected by the pandemic. So there's challenges. You know, there are benefits it's working, however there are challenges, and the challenges that an organising committee faces are primarily, we are a transient organisational structure. We're different to any other non-departmental body because we're not wholly funded by national government department, and we don't have a long delivery period. You know, we incorporated in 2018. I think we had a shorter time period than many of the Commonwealth Games organising committees. And yeah, we've got that fixed deadline, that's happening, and that's when the games commence in July, and we need to be there to deliver it. But also we have a challenge of becoming an established, recognised client of choice for suppliers. So the transient organisational structure means that legal and procurement staff need to hit the ground running in a niche environment. Whilst lessons can be learnt from documents that people have created from past games, There's nothing that's quite like the anecdotal lessons that you may learn by sitting next to somebody in an office who's done the job previously. This isn't available initially. Obviously now I'm some 2 years into my role, and a lot of my staff have been in the organising committee, and we're learning. So there's things and knowledge that we're sharing, and things that we're learning from past games as well. However, that is an initial challenge at the beginning of an organisational committee. So Howard Shipley did comment in relation to the Olympics that the ODA would have to gain in months what many client organisations would pursue in years, and that's the establishment as a recognised client of choice. The OC almost has to disrupt the supply chain and tenderers' business as usual, because obviously they'll have scheduled contracts that they'll be tendering for within years, and they'll have plans like 10-year plans, for example, of the scheduled work and contracts that they're going for. We almost have to disrupt that to say, hey, look at us, we're here, we're delivering this game, do you want to be part of it? So our challenge is higher, and I think obviously with the effects of the pandemic and sometimes people having to refrain and restrain their budget, etc., and limited resources, we've had to try that bit harder, I think, to gather tenderers' attention. And the fixed deadline, obviously, that deadline's fixed. It's not moving. So come what may, we and our suppliers do need to deliver. There's been global crises thrown in just for the fun to add to the standard challenges that we would have as an organisational committee. And that, in particular, we've encountered those over the past 3 years. They've impacted on the consistency of our market engagement, because obviously things are rapidly changing. So obviously the pandemic mentions the Ever Given container ship becoming stuck in the Suez Canal in March 2021. Fuel shortages have also caused issues. So for example, the transport of fuel from distribution terminals to forecourts, but also even our Storm Eunice that affected us earlier this year, affecting fuel getting into the UK and other containers being able to dock. Also, we've found within the UK that professional procurement professionals are in demand, so that has affected our ability to kind of just get on and deliver because we've got this limited timeline. However, it's not unusual for England in particular to face some kind of crises in the run-up to the Games. So for example, there was a financial crisis prior to London 2012 which impacted on its procurements as well. There are a vast array of opportunities, and this is why I am a firm believer that it does work within using public procurement for the games industry. So we have a blank canvas. We can use that blank canvas opportunity to create great opportunities. For example, sponsorship is part of our procurement tender process, and we've used the blank canvas to make it part of our assessment and evaluations, and ensure that all sponsorship opportunities are made available to our tenderers when they're tendering, and that the offers are evaluated as part of that. This is integral because it's part of our commercial delivery of the games and lessens the amount that the UK taxpayer would have to pay for the games. We've also advertised some games as multi-games opportunities. So obviously we're advertising the Birmingham opportunity, but there'll be further games after, and we've advertised those games as multi-games opportunities, and if the organisation committees for the later games choose to use the services of the for their next games, they can be put in touch with those specific tenderers, and there's that option there. So thousands of people will contribute to the games throughout the organising committee itself, but also our supply chain, and that's great. You're never too far away from an international perspective, which makes it less siloed. Also, we've had the opportunity, and this has become one of our challenges as well, to fit in a spectator experience and bumper patch sporting year. So our colleagues had to work really hard with other organising committees for example, football and World Athletics Championships, to ensure that everything fit into place, because obviously things got moved throughout the effects of earlier years on sporting events. Our achievements. So we have been able to run timely, flexible procedures. Most contracting authorities take years to commence and conclude iterative processes. whereas the OC has advertised and concluded its overlay turnkey procurements and many of the flexible procedures within 1 year, which is really good going. Also, the flexibility built into our contracts with suppliers from the onset of the pandemic enabled us to work collaboratively with federations and ensure that we've got that great sporting gear for all sports fans. I touched on this previously, but the tenacity of my colleagues to continue to deliver whilst remote and hit significant milestones has been a real achievement, and I don't think this would have necessarily been envisaged in 2018 at the incorporation of the OC. So Blaise, I don't know how you've got on with totting up all the poll results from our online community.
Well, first of all, thank you, Alexia. That was awesome. It's always good to get in. I think, generally speaking, people have a lot of questions for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Generally, people agree.
Yeah.
I think that public procurement has done itself some favours over the past few years. But I do want to make sure everybody gets to go network, but I'll ping through some questions. I'll start with one here and then would love to go to the floor. So from Glenn White, our own Glenn White, how does legal procurement sit within the larger procurement team and functions for the games? And as the organiser, how many categories of procurement do you have? Right,
so legal procurement, my title is a bit strange because it's legal procurement, but I'm within the legal team, and then there's a procurement team, and my reports and I would facilitate the procurement that they have. In terms of categories, because as I said, there has been this shortage of procurement professionals, we did initially have towers for all of the procurements, and they were mainly split up in terms of like the cultural side of the games, because obviously the games has to put on ceremonies, Queen's Baton Relay, and there's also going to be a festival, so there's a subsidiary of the OC that deals with that. And then you had the more kind of structural, partially construction side of the games, where you'd have the overlay where you turn a venue around into making it fit for a games. That was another category. And then we had like a third category, which was all the kind of other general supplies as well. Gotcha. Did I answer that completely?
No, that's great.
That's great.
So I'm just wondering, what are your mandatory requirements for sourcing, such as social valuating? Like, yeah. I'm just wondering, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so obviously we'd have the quality, and it would never really just be price only, and social value coming in about 10 to 20%, and then different things within the quality that we would be looking at. So obviously, just the real technical side of it, and health and safety as an aspect in relation to health and safety as well. But there's really a lot of flexibility for each specific procurement to tailor it. So as long as we've got the part price, part quality, our social value. By the time you take away social value, you're about 50% quality. So the flexibility sits within the actual, what we call a functional area, to determine what exactly they want to put in. Yeah. Excellent.
Do we have any questions from the floor? We do. Emily, the lady up in the front here. While she's getting you that, I'm just wondering, can you tell us about the legacy? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so we have basically a charity that is called United by Birmingham that will take on and manage the legacy after the games, but also we do have a legacy team. So when we are looking at procurement, some procurements will focus a bit more on legacy, and the social value element will include legacy. Also with, say, for example, our sports procurements, we'll be looking at what we do with the materials, because we'll be procuring things like balls, etc. What will be happening with those pieces of equipment, and that's, everybody has to bear that in mind when they're setting out to procure something, because not only is it making it sustainable, but there's a real good use where equipment can be put to use too. So it's something that's just part of everybody's objective. It's like a silent objective.
Yeah. Excellent. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Claudette Binns, Alexia's mum, so I've got a vested interest in the question that I'm going to ask, because obviously you come together for the OC, and all these people I know are working towards bringing the games to us. But what happens to you all afterwards?
Yeah, so full transparency there as to where the question has come from. But once we finish the games, we'll obviously wind up the OC. So the OC winds up, we do a transfer of knowledge to Commonwealth Games Federation and to DCMS, who is our parent organisation. And then the staff at the games are then no longer working for the games, so go on to do different projects.
Excellent. I know that we started late because of the tech issues, so if you want to break out for the networking, go for it. I will ask one more because I don't want to feel like you're shortchanged. From a procurement standpoint, are you looking to work more with local SMEs or corporations?
I think we've got an objective to work with SMEs. So from a procurement standpoint, where we can work with SMEs, we will try to facilitate that, and we will go out and do events and make sure our documents, etc., are accessible to all. Obviously, we do things through our Delta e-portal system. So if there's any questions, then we will facilitate that and answer that. But to be as fair as possible, the opportunity is there. The opportunity is there for all corporations and SMEs. But where we can divide things into lots to make things more appropriate for SMEs, then we will do so.
Yeah. That is all we have time for, although we are having more and more questions coming in about how you use an agile supply chain. But for now, we'll just have to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alexia Binns. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much.